The valley is quiet in the early morning. On the ridge to the north, the army of Israel has made its camp, thousands of men, armed and waiting. To the south, on the opposing slope, the Philistines have done the same. Between them, a shallow valley cuts through the Shephelah, the lowland foothills of Judah, and at its floor, a dry stream bed winds between low scrub and pale stone. Neither army has moved. For 40 days the same man has walked out from the Philistine lines into that valley. Every morning and every evening he stands alone in the open ground and calls upward toward the Israelite camp. And for 40 days no one has answered him. He is enormous. His bronze armor weighs more than most men can carry. His spear is built like a timber, and his voice, when it carries up the hillside, does not simply challenge, it mocks, it dares. It assumes that nothing in the Israelite camp could possibly answer it. He has been right for 40 days. What he has not accounted for is a teenager from Bethlehem carrying a bag of stones. This is Bible Stories Unearthed, where we retell the narratives of Scripture alongside the history, archaeology, and ancient world that give them their full weight. Today, the confrontation in the Valley of Elah, what it meant in its own time, and what 2 decades of excavation at the city Goliath called home have revealed about the world behind the story. Around 1200 BC, a wave of migrants swept into the eastern Mediterranean and transformed the political map of the Levant. The ancient record calls them the Sea Peoples. Among them was the group that settled the coastal plain of Canaan and built 5 powerful cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. We call them the Philistines. They were not, as popular imagination often paints them, culturally primitive. Archaeological evidence from their cities shows a people with strong Aegean roots. Their earliest pottery is nearly indistinguishable from Mycenaean styles found across the Greek world. Genetic studies published in 2019, drawing on ancient DNA recovered from early Philistine burials at Ashkelon, confirmed what the pottery had long suggested. These were migrants with genuine European ancestry who planted their culture on the shores of Canaan and built something distinctive there over the following centuries. They were also militarily sophisticated in ways the highland Israelites were not. The Philistines maintained organized, professional military forces, standing armies with dedicated supply chains, specialist weapons, and institutional structure. The Israelites, by contrast, were largely a highland people, shepherds and farmers who assembled into fighting forces when they needed to, without anything resembling a standing military. The book of 1 Samuel records that the Israelites had to travel to Philistine smiths simply to sharpen their farm tools, though scholars note that iron itself was still relatively scarce for both peoples in this period, and the passage more likely reflects the broader gap in military infrastructure than a specific monopoly on metal. The Philistines were organized where the Israelites were not, and that gap was being felt. The tension between these two worlds had been building for generations. By the reign of Saul, Israel's first king, it had become existential. The Philistines were not simply raiding borders. They were pushing inland through the Shephelah toward the Israelite heartland. The Valley of Elah was that border, and on a morning in the late 11th century BC, it became the stage for one of the most famous confrontations in recorded history. The account comes from 1 Samuel chapter 17. The Philistine forces had gathered in the territory of Judah and camped at Ephes Damim, between Soko and Azekah. Saul and the men of Israel faced them across the valley. Both sides held the high ground. The floor between them, exposed, open, and watched from both ridges, was the last place anyone wanted to fight. Into that space stepped a man the text names as Goliath of Gath. The description 1 Samuel gives is precise and deliberate. He wore a bronze helmet. He was armored in scale mail, interlocking bronze plates the text calls a coat of mail, weighing approximately 5,000 shekels of bronze. That is roughly 125 pounds of armor on his body. His legs were protected by bronze greaves. He carried a javelin tipped with iron. His spear shaft was compared to a weaver's beam, a heavy loom rod, thick enough to draw a comparison to timber. And the iron head alone weighed 600 shekels, around 15 pounds. Scholars have noted that this particular combination of equipment, especially the bronze greaves and heavy scale mail worn together, aligns more closely with military conventions of the 7th and 6th centuries BC than with what the archaeological record typically shows for Sea People warriors of the 11th century. Whether this reflects the equipment of Goliath's specific tradition, the vocabulary available to the text's author, or some other explanation, remains a matter of scholarly discussion. What the description does convey unmistakably is the portrait of a professional, a champion, a man whose entire purpose was to stand in open ground and be impossible to face. And then there is his height. Here the ancient manuscripts do not entirely agree, and the difference is worth sitting with. The Masoretic text, the Hebrew Bible as preserved through medieval Jewish scholarship, and the basis for most modern Old Testament translations, gives Goliath's height as 6 cubits and a span. Depending on how you calculate a cubit in this period, that places him somewhere between 9 feet and 9 feet 9 inches tall. But the story was also preserved in other manuscript traditions. The Dead Sea Scrolls include a copy of Samuel, known to scholars as 4Q Sam A, dated to roughly the 1st century BC, and among the oldest surviving manuscripts of these books. And it gives a different number, 4 cubits and a span. That is approximately 6 feet 9 inches. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century AD, records the same shorter figure. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, also carries the shorter reading. Many scholars today consider the shorter figure more likely to be closer to the original text, and that the taller number may have entered the Masoretic tradition through later scribal transmission. Others maintain the longer reading is original. This remains a genuinely open debate in the scholarly literature. What is not in dispute? At 6 feet 9, Goliath is still extraordinary. He stands a full head and shoulders above almost anyone facing him. He is armored, experienced, and chosen by the Philistines because of what he represents. An army's will and reputation compressed into a single body. His challenge was specific. The text records it in almost identical words twice, for emphasis. Send out your best man. Let the two of us settle this between us. If your man defeats me, we will be your servants. If I defeat him, you will serve us. One fight. The outcome binds both armies. This kind of arrangement, champion combat, a single contest between two representatives, was not an invention of the biblical writer. It appears across the ancient Near East, in Mesopotamian texts, in Egyptian records, in the Iliad. It was an understood convention, a way to resolve a standoff at lower cost than full engagement, and a way to frame military supremacy as something more than numbers. The strongest man in the Philistine camp stood in the valley and told the Israelites that everything could be compressed into one contest, his contest. For 40 days, no one in Israel's camp accepted those terms. David arrived at the camp not as a soldier but as an errand boy. He was the youngest son of a man named Jesse from Bethlehem. 3 of his older brothers were serving in Saul's army. His father sent him down to the camp with bread and roasted grain for his brothers and 10 cheeses for their commander. He had been at home tending sheep. He had no armor, no military rank, no standing in the camp. What he carried was a sling. A shepherd's sling in the ancient world was not a toy. It was a precision instrument, and shepherds who used them daily to drive off predators, to guide flocks, to defend animals in isolated terrain, developed extraordinary accuracy over years of practice. David tells Saul as much directly. He has killed lions and bears with it while guarding his father's flock. Military forces across the ancient Near East deployed slingers as a serious component of their armies. Assyrian stone reliefs show slingers in disciplined combat formation alongside archers and spearmen. Archaeological excavations at Iron Age sites throughout the region have recovered sling stones, smooth river rocks, and purpose-formed lead and clay projectiles in significant quantities. A stone from a trained slinger struck with enough force to kill. The Philistine army, with its heavy infantry and champion warrior, did not have a good answer for one. Saul, recognizing something in this boy, offered him his own armor. The text records that David put it on: the bronze helmet, the coat of mail, the sword strapped over it, and then tried to walk. He could barely move. He had never trained in equipment like this. He took it all off, picked up his staff, went down to the stream bed at the floor of the valley, and chose 5 smooth stones. He put them in his bag. When Goliath saw who was walking toward him, his reaction is one of the sharpest moments in the text. He was not afraid. He was offended. A boy with a stick. He cursed David by the names of his gods and promised to feed his body to the birds and the animals of the field. David's reply is one of the great speeches in the Hebrew Bible. He came, he told Goliath, not in the name of sword or spear, but in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom the Philistine had defied. The whole earth would know that day that there was a God in Israel, and that God did not save by sword or spear. Then the text says something that gets lost in most retellings. David ran. He did not walk cautiously toward the giant. He did not hesitate at the edge of range. The text says he ran quickly toward the battle line. He reached into his bag, loaded a single smooth stone into the leather pouch of the sling, and launched it. One violent, targeted arc. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead. The giant, 125 pounds of bronze armor and everything beneath it, fell forward, face down, into the dirt of the wadi. David had brought no sword of his own. He stood over the fallen Philistine champion, drew Goliath's own weapon from its scabbard, the iron sword that had hung at the side of the most feared warrior on the field, and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel pursued them all the way to the gates of Ekron, and the dead were left along the road. David brought the head of Goliath to Jerusalem. He kept the sword as a memorial. For thousands of years, that was where the story ended, with a severed head and a bloodied sword carried into a city that would become the capital of a kingdom. But in 1996, archaeologists broke ground in the Shephelah, about 25 kilometers northeast of Ashkelon. They were digging into a massive ancient mound called Tel es-Safi. They were digging up Gath. Gath, the city the text identifies as Goliath's home, is now the prevailing scholarly identification for Tel es-Safi. Excavations directed by Aaron Meyer of Bar Ilan University have been running there continuously since 1996, and the site has built into one of the most detailed pictures we have of Philistine urban life. In 2005, excavators at the site recovered a pottery sherd bearing two names inscribed in an early Semitic script. Aaron Meyer and his colleagues identified these names as belonging to the same Indo-European linguistic family as the name Goliath, the same broader naming tradition that would have been current among Philistines at Gath in the Iron Age. To be clear about what this find does and does not tell us, it does not establish that a man named Goliath fought David at the Valley of Elah. What it does establish, and this is genuinely significant, is that names of this linguistic type were real and in use at Gath. The biblical account is drawing on a cultural reality, not an invented one. The site also preserves evidence of a catastrophic destruction event dated to around 830 BC, consistent with the account in 2 Kings of Hazael, king of Aram, besieging and taking the city of Gath. The archaeological destruction layer and the biblical record align in specific, datable detail. This kind of convergence is exactly what contextual archaeology provides. Not proof of one specific episode, but confirmation that the world the biblical text describes is a real one. Archaeology cannot tell us whether a specific man named Goliath fought a specific man named David on a specific morning in the Valley of Elah. That is not what the discipline does. And framing it as a test, the evidence either passes or fails, misrepresents both the archaeology and the text. What the evidence does is place the story inside a real and richly detailed world, a Philistine city that existed, a naming tradition that existed, a destruction that happened. The story sits inside history. How deeply it reaches into it is a question each listener will answer for themselves. There is one textual complication that honest engagement with this story requires acknowledging. In 2 Samuel 21:19, a passage describing David's later wars, the text states that a warrior named Elhanun, son of Jairi-Orajim the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite. The parallel passage in 1 Chronicles 25 gives a different version. Elhanun killed Lami, the brother of Goliath. Many scholars read the Chronicles passage as a later scribal adjustment intended to address the tension with 1 Samuel 17. Others argue the 2 Samuel text contains a copying error that can be identified in the Hebrew. The two passages cannot be straightforwardly reconciled, and the question remains open in the scholarly literature. David and Goliath has become, in modern usage, a shorthand for every underdog story. an idiom so embedded in the language that the biblical original is sometimes lost behind the metaphor. But the original is stranger and richer than the metaphor suggests. It is not simply a story about a small person defeating a large one. It is a story about a boy who walks into the valley before anyone else does. Not because he is better trained, not because he has superior equipment, but because he has arrived at a completely different calculation. He looks at the same giant that has paralyzed a professional army for 40 days and sees the situation differently. He chooses different ground. He does not accept the terms as given. What the manuscripts, the excavations, and the ancient comparative record all confirm is that the world this story describes was real. A real valley, a real city, a real tradition of champion combat, a real culture of Philistine military power pressing against a highland people who should not, by any calculation of force, have been able to hold the line. Within that real world, something happened at the Valley of Elah. The echo of it has not stopped. Thank you for being here. This story has been told. Subscribe and return to Bible Stories Unearthed. The book is open. Let's unearth more.